Welcome back to the Non-Traditional Veterinarian Podcast. We're going to pick up where we left off. Man, why was that such a tongue twister? Where we left off last week. So last week we talked about mycotoxins, and they're the toxic compounds that come from certain mold species and why it can be really, really important to discover for your pet's health. I went over what I've discovered with my dog's health with them. And I alluded to that this week we're going to be talking about glyphosate. And so that's exactly what we are going to dive into. And so why I want to talk about this is that it can be one of those invisible exposures that maybe doesn't cause an immediate crisis in your pet's health, but it can quietly shape their long-term health and not the shape that we want. And so I want to go over what glyphosate is, why it matters for your pet's health, maybe how it relates to your pet's health, and what you can do. And so if your dog or cat or pet has had persistent liver values elevated and you're not quite sure why, or their allergies, you just can't get ahead of them, or their stomach just seems so sensitive that they can't tolerate new foods or certain foods. I'm not saying that this is the missing piece. What I am saying is that it may be time to pause and consider investigating it. So did you know that glyphosate is actually considered an antibiotic? Yes. And so it is a broad spectrum herbicide. So it's commonly found in conventional crops, lawns, parks, even some food ingredients. In fact, just today, when I was scrolling the gram of Instagram, I saw a veterinarian had shared about a recent study that showed how much a percentage of foods actually have mycotoxins and glyphosate when they're tested. And so this is relating to traditional kibbles. I'm not going to name, shame, or anything. Why I am sharing this with you is that this is why it's very easy to think because your pet is eating a certain way or living a certain way that there's no way that they can be exposed. In fact, I've had pet parents say, and I swear, well, I live in a gated community, so I don't have to worry about heartworms. As if the mosquitoes don't go past if they're stopped at the guard gate. And I wish it was that easy because, man, that would just make things so much simpler, wouldn't it? And so my whole goal here is to give you the information so that you feel empowered, so that you hopefully don't feel frustrated if you feel like you've exhausted all options for your pet's health. And maybe your pet's healthy. I look at these tests too as they can also be part of wellness screening. It doesn't always have to be reactive. It doesn't always have to be, well, my pet is sick or dealing with X, Y, and Z, so this is something I'm going to consider. It's also really valuable to know these things so that way if your pet is healthy, are they truly as healthy as you think they are? And so my dog, who I presume to be as healthy as possible from what I know about his health, I still did this test on him, and I'll be honest with you, much like I mentioned in the mycotoxin, I plan to do this test probably every 6 to 12 months for him, at least once a year for him, just to know. So that way I can be proactive rather than being reactive. So glyphosate being a very common, or not, I want to say not an uncommon herbicide used, but it doesn't just stop at maybe the food or the environment. How it works is what's really important because it affects bacteria in their gut. And that's where it gets really interesting for pets. And I'm not going to say it doesn't get interesting for us that way, but we're here to talk about the pets, right? So I test or I recommend or I discuss glyphosate testing because it can sometimes help discover or uncover the why a pet may be having chronic GI issues, why they may have inflammation issues. Maybe they have weight that they just can't lose. And you're like, I don't understand. Nothing else has changed. Theoretically, on paper, my pet should be losing weight. They have immune dysregulation. Their allergy are out of control. They have poor nutrient absorption. You've had their vitamin D checked and it's not healthy. So despite what looks like they're eating a good diet, they're living a good lifestyle, this test can give us insight on what is the environmental load that they're exposed to, not just waiting for these signs to show up. And I think it's really cool when we can do that and we don't have to wait until they're sick. Or if we've been dealing with this chronic issue, how can we help get to the root cause? So when glyphosate levels are elevated, it can absolutely disrupt digestive enzymes. So meaning the food is not broken down efficiently. It can impair certain pathways that are critical to detox and immune function. And it can absolutely drive gut dysbiosis, meaning gut imbalance, meaning the gut ecosystem, the community of bacteria and fungi that are supposed to be there. It can really be selective on decreasing and minimizing good bacteria and allowing pathogenic bad bacteria to have its opportunity to rear its head. And so specifically, glyphosate can target specific bacteria and downregulate good bacteria. So basically it hinders them. This is Bifidobacterium, Lactobacillus, Enterococci. And what I'm not telling you to do is to memorize these bacteria. What I am trying to do is give you specific examples of what I mean by this. And so these bacteria, those I listed, and that's not the only ones that are important, these are very, very special bacteria that we want to nurture just right. We also don't want these bacteria to overgrow either. And I use this example a lot in consultations, is think of a city that there's kind of a hierarchy. There's an infrastructure. You have a mayor, you have city officials, you have waste, you have electric, you have water, you have cleaning, there's so many, you have police, you have fire. And imagine if in the city you had 4 mayors and at all the appropriate fire departments and police stations that they're where they're supposed to be, but one fire station has 1 firefighter EMT, the other one has 20, another one has 4, one police station has 2 police officers, another one has 50. It's just there's not a really nice balance. And so when these bacteria are affected, it can absolutely disrupt the infrastructure that we need. We need the balance. We need certain populations. And so these bacteria are really essential to gut barrier integrity. So think the gut wall, immune balance, vitamin production, inflammation control. These are all really, really important things. And so at the same time, glyphosate can favor, and I kind of just alluded to this, the growth of less desirable bacteria, especially at overgrowth amounts like Salmonella, Clostridium, Staphylococcus. Those are ones we don't want taking over. We don't need multiples of those, more than we need. We don't want, now, this isn't saying that all of them are bad. There are certain Clostridiums that we like, and there are some that we're like, yeah, we got to be careful with you. And so these imbalances can absolutely set the stage for chronic inflammation, leaky gut, recurring infections, sensitivities. And as many of us have discovered, is that inflammation is the root of, I'm not going to say every disease, although I want to. Really, really weird about absolutes. There are certain absolutes that I'm like, yes, this is a home run always or never. But it really can be the stage for so many diseases allowing to amplify, is having inflammation. And so I tested my dog, and I had no idea what to expect. I'm very intentional that I do not spray my lawn at all. I'm very intentional about the chemicals used in and around my home, but I also walk him. And I do try and be very intentional about where I walk him, what yards I allow him to really frolic in and smell and sniff and walk in, versus the ones that look a little bit more inviting, maybe because it looks like maybe they don't use certain lawn chemicals. And I'm not to say that if a house or yard is very weedy that no chemicals are used. It's very possible they sprayed yesterday because they want to get rid of the weeds, right? But I try and be intentional. I wipe off his paws when I come in from outside. I try and be intentional about what he eats, but I can't control everything. And so what this is not meant to do is to add something to your plate that you're like, this is something else I have to stress about. In fact, it's just the opposite. My goal to educate you on this is to let you know that there are other options that maybe help you get to the root cause. That this is something that you can explore, because you can control what you can, and what you can't control, you find options to help support. That's what this is for. So his results came back that I was very, very content with. I was very happy. Now, what I'm not going to do is never retest him because, oh, it was fine and it's a one and done. And I will tell you, I see a functional doctor for myself, which is why I like so many of these tests, is that I feel like it's from a functional approach. It gets to the root cause. It helps explain the why. And it may not be, let's say we test your pet for glyphosate and they're positive for an abnormal amount. That may or may not be that may be just part of the puzzle for them. It may be the missing piece. And so what I'm not going to do is just test this once. And I mentioned my functional doctor is my doctor has tested me for stuff that this is a one and done because it is what it is and it's not going to change and that's it. Almost like familial, like hereditary things. But glyphosate is one of those things it can change. And so I do plan to continue to test my dog, probably at least once a year. Probably, no, definitely not going longer than 12 months. If I'm feeling sporty, I may do it every 6 to 12 months because I absolutely love my dog with my whole heart and I want him to live not only just as long as possible, but as well as possible. I don't want him to get to 16 where 6 of those years were horrible years for him, but I get to say my dog made it to 16. I want him to live as long as possible and live really well those years. And so while I don't think that his levels were appropriate by accident because I am intentional, I also know we can be really intentional and sometimes things happen. And so to help keep glyphosate levels in check, there are things I do focus on. So I try and reduce dietary glyphosate exposure, and that is being intentional about what ingredients are in his food. There are certain ingredients that may be more prone to this because of the nature of those ingredients being sourced. I'm not going to say all grains are going to have glyphosate, but certain ingredients are going to have more risk of exposure because of the nature of harvesting those ingredients. And then, if you want to go down the rabbit hole for just a second, is you have to think about certain maybe protein sources. What is their diet consist of? And could their diet be exposed to some of these things? So again, this is not meant to add more stress or anxiety on your plate. What it is to do is to allow you to think more critically for your pet and to know what you can and can't control. And maybe this is if you're aligned with a certain way with nurturing them and nutrition or feeding them, then you know, okay, because I know that this is a possible risk, I am going to have this part of my wellness screening for them. Or you live in a community where you have no control over them spraying. I have tons of clients that live in beautiful HOA communities where they're pristine. And I guarantee if they're spraying some sort of herbicide on there, they can't control that, right? Like you can't always control what happens in your home environment, depending on where you live. I don't expect people to just sell their houses because of this. So what it does allow you is to be informed so that you know, okay, this is something I can't control, so how can I support my pet? Whether that is testing, or I'm being more mindful of their nutrition, or I support their detox pathways, or this is something I screen for regularly. And regularly, maybe that's once a year. You can also help keep these levels in check by supporting their gut microbiome. So beneficial bacteria can really thrive. You can use fibers and nutrients to help bind and really kind of see those toxins out. So making sure that we are eating as balanced as possible nutrition. And this is where I'm going to be a little bit of a plug here, is I have pet parents who come to me with the best of intentions that they're cooking for their pets. Best of intentions. And they're not balanced. There's very little fiber in there, or there's maybe too much of a certain type of fiber. There's too much soluble or insoluble. And every pet's a little bit different depending on where their gut health is at and what they can tolerate. But sometimes we just miss these gaps that can be better for them by nurturing them. And to really, I think a lot of pet parents switch to home cooking for several reasons. Sometimes it's simply alignment in beliefs. Sometimes it's, well, I noticed when I did this that their allergies got better. Or sometimes owners are like, I don't like feeding my dog commercial foods. I like controlling all the ingredients. So we want to make sure that we're properly giving them the right macronutrients, fiber being one of them. And another way to help keep it in check, this is not a guarantee, but something you can do, you're controllable, is avoiding ultra-processed inputs that increase chemical load, ultra-processed treats, ultra-processed foods. And if you're like, but doc, I switched my dog's food to this to this traditional kibble, and it's the first time we're not dealing with X, Y, Z. I hear you. I absolutely hear you. And I love meeting pet parents where they're at. And I also love being able to show them what is the best way we can elevate what you're comfortable with. How we can make it even better. Is that swapping out packaged treats and doing whole foods and vegetables? Like, what does that look like? And so why I'm going to retest is because exposure can change. Absolutely. My neighbors, who thankfully don't spray their yards, could decide that they're going to start spraying. Heck, one of them can move. I hope not, because I really, really love my neighbors. One of them can move and someone can come in. the stuff can drift. If you live near a golf course, like things can change, you can move. And so diets can change, environments can change. So that's why I am going to retest, is that I know that my dog and I don't live in a vacuum. Things change. And so I want to make sure that I'm not missing a slow shift that will eventually become a snowball. And that snowball causes an avalanche. And so next week, I am also going to explain why I tested my dog for heavy metals and minerals, what showed up, how that plays a role in their health, your pet's health. What I found with my dog, do I need to detox him? Do I need to explore things? What pattern am I seeing? So I want you to tune in next week for that episode as we dive a little bit more into maybe what could be the why behind your pet's issues, or how we just keep them as healthy as we think they are. So if you've ever wondered why your pet struggles despite doing everything right, or I've tried everything, sometimes looking a little bit deeper can often fill the pieces and the gaps that we're looking for. I can't wait to see you next week.